This lady's name has been synonymous with this election season in terms of what it looks like to get involved. And for those of you who do not know her, now's the time. These are the names we should be talking about. These are the names we should have been talking about all along, because this is the work that's being done that very few people want to do, by the way. So she's going to talk to us about the blueprint of what she's done. And she is the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. She's one of the reasons why Georgia right now is sitting firmly in a blue spot, and Stacey Abrams may be governor. We may have 2 senators coming out of that state because of the work she's done, among others. Let me welcome to the show for the first time, Miss Latosha Brown. Thank you for coming through.
Thank you for having me, sister. Thank you for having me on here.
Listen, we a lot of us, mic jockeys, keyboard jockeys, they talk about empowerment, and I'm gonna put myself in that position. Very few of us are out there in the streets and out there during a pandemic, out there when no cameras are there. Take us all the way back, Latasha, to the first time that you decided that you were going to do something.
Well, the first thing I did right was the day I started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. That's a song called Eyes on the Prize, and there was a film called Eyes on the Prize that documented what happened in the 60s. And so I'm a native of Selma, Alabama, which was instrumental in the voting rights movement. And so while I wasn't around yet when the voting rights movement took place, many of the people who were young organizers at the time were my mentored me in some form or fashion. And so you can't grow up in Selma and not hear kind of the stories of what people were experiencing in Selma. And so a lot of what happened in the place where I was, in that place, actually shaped my belief around the possibilities, what Black people could do, right? The possibilities of what you could do when you tapped into your humanity, even though those folks in Selma didn't have government on their side. They didn't have the most resources. It wasn't like they were wealthy and they were dropping dollars. What they did have, though, is they had this sense of belief in their own agency and their own power. And so even as a child, it's so funny, my whole trajectory, because there's a running joke in my family, Karen, around when I was a child, as a kid, I would be with my grandmother or anybody, and I would go to a store, and I was obsessed with who was the owner. Like, so we would go to Walmart or Kmart, and I was like, who owns Kmart? My grandma was like, baby, I don't know who owns Kmart, right? But I was like, I want to know who owns it. We would go to McDonald's. Literally, that was my mind. I wanted to know who was in charge. I just had this thing about really knowing, and I realized as I got older that there was something about that I was always intrigued with, who had power to make decisions. And then the second thing is that I never liked bullies. I mean, from like, I could be the little girl, the little skinny girl with the ribbons, and because I was prissy, I was like the prissiest tomboy ever, because I like being prissy, right? But I would pull up on a brother in a heartbeat if I saw them trying to take advantage of something. I never could stand seeing someone take advantage of another person's weakness. It was something about that. So I would be the little girl that go jump in the fights, right? Or the little girl that would the boy that was quiet and the other boys, the bully boys, would mess with him. I might jump in. Or even the girls that were mean. The bottom line is, I always felt like there was some role or some responsibility I had with stopping the pain of other people. And so I think that combined with this obsession that I had, and probably still have, around power and how people use their power, that kind of came together. And so Selma became like a breeding ground for that. I moved to Selma with my aunt at 12, and as I was like that became the space of, actually I came there a little bit before that, but that became the space in which I started thinking about the environment around me and how I could impact it. And so I didn't get up one day and was like, I'm gonna be an activist. Like, that's not what my thought was. I wanted to, know who had power, how I could find out who had power to influence that. And then 2, I wanted the pain to stop. And then at some point they came together. Like, if you got power, you can help the pain to stop. And so that's part of part of what kind of shaped my work. My first organizing work, I was organizing public housing and residence councils and public housing in both Tuskegee and Selma. And like I said, it was so funny because I don't know if it wasn't something that I was like, this is what I'm gonna grow up and be. I thought I was gonna grow up and be a corporate attorney. I don't know where I had that, but somewhere I heard that and it sounded good. And so I was like, okay, I'm smart, I can do this. So the shaping really was really driven by my desire to make power work in a way to stop pain in people, right? And so for me, politics was one way. It kind of called me forth. It was one way that I could see how you could engage folks to really stop the pain that was happening to them, to stop the pain happening in their community. And so that's kind of what moved me, and that's really moved and shaped me in the work that I do now.
Talk about, and we're talking with Latosha Brown, who also can sing her face off, apparently, which I love. The first victory, the first time you knew, oh, okay, your intent was to stop the pain. Your intent was to galvanize this power for the use of your people. When did you see the first evidence of this could work?
It's interesting. It is the first time that it's not the first time I had victory, because I saw victories in many ways before that. There's a first time I saw victory was actually when I was actually running for a student council position, right? But the first time that I really felt what organizing could do in terms of galvanizing people for power, I don't know if it's the first time. Let me say this. I'm not going to say it's the first time. I'm being drawn right now to share the time that was probably most impactful. The first time that was the most impactful for me. And that was actually just in 2000. I was in there are kind of two things that happened. And it's really one kind of anchors the other. So I'll start with 2000 and I'm going to go back to 1998. So in 2000, there was in Selma, Alabama, we had the same mayor in Selma, Alabama, Joe T. Smithman, had been the mayor of Selma ever since Dr. King had marched across the bridge. Matter of fact, he was the mayor that had called Dr. King Dr. Martin Luther King. Now, this is in a 70% Black city that is known for the voting rights movement, right? Yet it had never had an African-American mayor. And it was interesting because there were all these theories that folks outside of the city had about, we were too scared or why y'all won't organize and all of these things. When the truth of the matter is, part of that resulted from voter suppression. Like literally how in a 70% Black city, how you keep winning vote, why on election day, now the city's 50-50, right? The numbers didn't add up. And we know it was documented. It was voter suppression, which means in order to offset the voter suppression, we had to have a higher turnout. And so in that election, we worked like crazy. There was a campaign that one of my mentors had come up with, and it was called the Joe Gotta Go. His name was Joe Smith, was like, Joe gotta go. And literally there was and so for me, I decided as a young woman at the time, I was in my 20s, I was like, I'm focusing on the Joe gotta go. I mean, I'm gonna focus on the young folks and engaging the young people. Cliff and I, which is interesting, before we started Black Voters Matter, you might say that was probably the genesis of Black Voters Matter starting. And so we organized our faces off. We organized so much that literally the polls were closed and we were on our way to a house to pull some folk up out of the house to go vote. And we started seeing people line up on the street, on Broad Street in Selma. And we were like, what is happening? And people knew that people could feel victory in the air. People just literally started lining on the streets, right? Knowing that victory had taken place. And so that particular moment we wound up flipping this seat and electing our first African-American mayor, who ironically was just elected again this year. After a little hiatus, he's been elected again, and Mayor Perkins. It was interesting because I felt the power of it. And I'm telling you, you could feel it in the air, literally out of all the years I stayed in Selma. Like, I was like, people are just lining up on the streets. Like, we knew we won. Like, we knew we had won, right? And it's interesting because it kind of reminds me of, I know folks gonna say, well, no, I was clear that we had done everything we could do in 2020. And if there was any time that Black folks could make an impact and a difference in an election, it was this year. I knew it. Like, I knew it. I felt it. I could feel it. And so, and my judge of the win was, how well are we gonna show up? And so that was the first time I remember, like, I remember feeling what organized power could do. That, like, literally it created, it wasn't just waiting on the results. People could feel the energy. We knew we had done something, right? And it didn't even matter. It was almost like the win happened before the results came out. Like, the win was in us. We knew we had showed up, right? And so it was something about that moment, what was defining for me around the power of showing up, right? And so 2 years prior to that, in an interesting, like, on the opposite end of it, I had run for State Board of Education. I was a young woman. I never ran for office before. I was a single mother, no name recognition outside of organs in the circles. But what was interesting is the same lesson applied there. The one thing I knew is, you can't out-organize me. Now, you might be able to raise more money. You might be able to do some other things, right? But you can't get me on the ground. You can't out-organize me on the ground. It's kind of like the cousin that plays spades, that like, literally walk around with the spades cards, like, you can't beat me on spades now, right? So it was a certain kind of confidence that I had around organizing that came from deep listening, to be honest, and being trained by master organizers. And so, you know, that year I didn't know what I was doing. I had a girlfriend who, Rhonda Ridley, who, she had a Jetta, a blue Jetta. And so all my campaign materials were created in Kinko's. And my campaign office was a Jetta, a blue Jetta. Towards the end, we got a little money. We were able to get a little office downtown. But for the most part, I ran my campaign in the streets. My campaign was in the streets. And so I was a long shot. Like, there was, like, no way, like, who would notice, you know, and I was a quintessential example of everything they say is not electable, right? It was a 12-year incumbent who was a minister. Here I'm a young single woman. I did everything. Like you just, like, you know, I'm wearing natural hair. Natural hair, I had 2-strand twists, similar to how Stacey Abrams has her hair now, in a time that it wasn't cool. Now it's cool now, but that wasn't cool.
In 1998. You're right.
Now, in Alabama, that was not cool. Even my own mother was like, baby, when you go get a perm, right? And so in that space, so I was rocking natural when natural wasn't cool. And in all of those, I didn't have all those degrees. I didn't have any of those things. And so I was like the antithesis of what they said a candidate's supposed to be. But what was interesting is, towards maybe a week or two out, we realized I was leading the AP polls, which was remarkable. And on election night, you know, it was, matter of fact, the governor had called me. The governor of the state of Alabama called to congratulate me. And only to discover that the race had not been, it was still, they couldn't call it. It was still going back and forth. So it took them 7 days to call the race. Long story short, it was 117 votes. It was my first time running. I'm out there. I'm like, okay, I lost. And they called the race, the 117 votes, my opponent won. And what was interesting is I got a phone call at 12 o'clock on that day from my mentor saying, brace yourself, you're gonna get a phone call from the Democratic Party. Get a phone call, and the chair of the party said, Latasha, I'm sorry to call and tell you this, but the sheriff in Wilcox County, which is one of the counties that I did very well in, said that he forgot he had 800 ballots that he had placed in the safe. And so in my mind, I'm like, oh, good. He found them. You got them. Let's count them. And it's a county that I care. He's like, no. The race has already been certified. I was like, okay, but you're going to count the votes, right? Because the votes were cast before that. No. The votes weren't found until after it was certified. And in that moment, I knew that they had stolen that election from me. And in many ways, there was nothing I could do. I felt powerless. I was like, I worked hard. I did all of this. I overcame all of this. And this sheriff can have that much power over the outcome, and nobody was held accountable. You know, I was told that I mean, I was advised that he was like, well, only thing I can say is you can seek legal remedy. Those things are those challenges are very, very, very costly. I didn't have the resources. I mean, like I told you, I was running my campaign out of a blue Jetta, right? So it just wasn't, I didn't have the bandwidth or the resources to be able to do that. But what it did do, the reason why I brought it up is what it did do is it sharpened my analysis around voting and voting suppression. And it sharpened my analysis around how we have to show up to gain power, right? And that it sharpened my analysis of how organizing works. That at the end of the day, even though I did not win that election, it was unquestionable for me that I had organized on the ground. And so in my mind, I was like, if I could do this for myself, right, in this on this small scale, literally this model of term organized power is realized power. And so it fed this whole belief, this path for me around organizing works and talking to people. And it's funny, I wasn't running. I really was running as a protest candidate. I wasn't really running necessarily. I was going to run to win because I'm a winner. I mean, that's I'm a Black woman. That's what we do. We ain't just spinning our wheels. But I didn't have. It wasn't like the race. If I didn't win, it was going to make me or break me. So I was, in some ways, I was detached enough where I could really listen to people and I could really be an authentic candidate instead of being a scripted candidate. Right? Because I wasn't so blind by the power that fundamentally I was running so that I could create a platform. And so many of those same lessons I've carried forward in my organizing as I do the work now, like really in terms of my, and there's also the time, Karen, that out of all the years of organizing in the Black community, it was the first time I had felt I'd gone through a discrimination. That because I was a woman, I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I grew up in a Black Baptist church. I couldn't believe this. I'd gone to a couple of churches and they wouldn't let me speak because they said they wouldn't let me speak on the diocese because they said I was a woman and I couldn't come in the pulpit. And I was just like, I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. And it also, that happened to me even most recently. But all of it, I think all of those things actually kind of sharpened my analysis of how oppression works. And it sharpened my analysis around organizing and authentic voice, how effective authentic voice and listening can be in terms of getting people engaged that normally wouldn't engage. Most folks didn't care about the State Board of Education. They couldn't even tell you what the State Board of Education did, right? But I think that there was, in the campaign, I brought a lot of energy to it because I was actually connecting people to it in a different kind of way that wasn't centered around me, was really centered around a larger vision of what we could do if we collectively use our power.
866-801-TALK, 866-801-8255 is the number here on the Karen Hunter Show. We have the great Latosha Brown. Ms. Latosha Brown, MS Latosha Brown is where you can follow her. And of course, Black Voters Matter is the organization. Let's go back to, and I love what you said about mentorship. I don't think anybody gets to a place without that. I think we don't put enough time sitting with elders. I don't think we spend enough time in the soil. I don't think we spend enough time learning and watching and listening to be able to have the muscle to go out and do what you're doing. But what is the biggest element? If you were to break down the blueprint or the anatomy of organizing, what are the elements that will make you successful at that?
The first thing is, it's so simple, it's almost comical, is to listen. Period. People organize, people approach organizing. A lot of folks, particularly new folks, will approach organizing like, I just need to get the people to believe what I believe. I just need to tell y'all what y'all need, right? People always got some advice for Black folk. Black folks always got some advice for Black folks. It's always a better way for us to do, to be, to hear, to see, everything, right? And part of it is having the discipline to listen to folks. If you listen to people, they will tell you how to lead them. And so part of the process is listening. When we started Black Voters Matter, Karen, we had this idea of what we wanted to do. I mean, Cliff Albright and I, the co-founders, have been doing this work for 27 years. So, I mean, on some level, we could say, well, we are experts at organizing. We are organized over 40 campaigns here, there, and all kind of stuff. So we could approach it from, this is what y'all need to do. That's not what we did. The first 6 months of our work, we literally got in a rental car. We went to the back roads of 7 states, to the state, all the states that folks don't think are sexy, the hard states, the states. We were back in the back roads of South Georgia and down in the country in Mississippi, Delta, and in Alabama and Tennessee and South Carolina and North Carolina, all those states that folks are saying, oh, those are red states, but also the states where our people are. And so we would go to those communities, literally, not a big fanfare, because nobody at the time knew who we were, right? We went on the faith and the belief that our folks got something to say and we want to hear it, right? And so we would go to communities and we would ask them, it would be interesting that a lot of our conversations, we would ask about, tell us about power. Tell us about what the power is here. And so interesting how often, you know, we would realize that nobody had ever asked our community about power. Like power wasn't the start of the conversation, right? And even when we talked about power, it was how power was used against us, right? Or how someone had power and we wanted to get access to it, or power that we needed them to like to either help us or to stop hurting us. But it was never from the context of, we like, no, our power, what power do we have? Right. And so that would shift some of the conversations to, even when people would complain, was like, yeah, we know what they're doing, but we're talking about, where is our power? Right. And so that we did that for 6 months, like literally this exercise of listening, to listen to people, I think is important. The second thing is, in Cliff's mentor and someone who greatly influenced my life, who was the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi, Mayor Chokwe Lumumba.
Yes.
Yes. Chokwe would say, you can't lead the people if you don't love the people. If you don't love the people, you can't lead the people. Right? Because if you don't love the people, you will betray the people. And that is the truest thing I have ever heard in my life. I love human beings. Don't you love human beings? But human beings can be hard now.
I was going to ask you about that. How do you lead people who don't want to be led? Or how do you help people lead themselves when there's friction? This election cycle, what you and your organization and Higher Heights and Stacey Abrams and her and all of the people who have been on the ground forever were able to do, I think, is nothing short of a miracle, with all the opposition in our own community telling people to stay home.
You got to focus on, I know this sounds so simple. I know this sounds real California woo-woo, but it's the truth. You got to focus on the love. You got to focus on, for me, when I really love something, it's like think about who the MVPs are in basketball. Like, those are brothers that love basketball. They eat, sleep, and breathe basketball, right? The driver is, when my muscles hurt, there's some people who love to win. Right. It was interesting. I would watch The Last Dance with about the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan. And all you had to do is to tell him what he can do. And it was a wrap. Like, he was going to a whole nother level. He loved to win, and he loved to push himself in that space. And I'm raising that because love is an activator. Right. And a lot of times we don't think about that. We think of love as a feeling and not necessarily the power of love to activate. And so we went around unapologetically telling Black folks, we love you so much that we can actually see your power. We love you so much that we are going to invest in you. So there were over 600 organizations in 11 states and 15 states that we invested in, out of that space, that spirit of, we love you, but we love you from a place of power. Matter of fact, we literally focused on some of the stuff in America because we're like, listen, like, when you love somebody, you bring correction. This country
Come
has to
on.
be corrected. If you really love this country, you ain't gonna stand when this country is on some BS. If you love this country, if like you say you do, you're gonna show up in a way and you're gonna be honest. Because think about your friends. You know, that friend that you got that always agree with you, you already know. Right. The first time that there's a power shift, a dynamic, I don't know if I can trust that sister. But that sister that will come to me and like, girl, you just wrong. Or you need to leave this alone, or you need to stop that, or you need to quit that job, or you need to think about yourself. That sister that comes in your life and will give you the raw, unadulterated truth, and you know and you feel it, love behind it, that's that sister that's your best friend, right? And so I'm saying that's the same thing in this space. Love works across the board, that fundamentally, if we were doing this space, we've been taught to do politics from a space of selfishness. Let's do politics about
That's how they do it. I mean, but you know, this year, Latasha, and Lord knows I do not want to cut you off, but I want to co-sign and give a different, not a different perspective, added perspective. I think for many of us growing up, we have been looking at our lives through the lens of white folk,
That's
whatever
right.
that means, right?
That's right.
Through a lens of what they can get from us.
That's right.
And even when you think about greed is good, you know, that has been, that's not who we are.
That's right.
So we've been being, I call it the drag queen theory. You know, we've been facsimiles of something that is never meant to be us. And we are never going to do it as well. We're never going to be that. Instead of being us in this system that we actually couldn't survive without us. Right. But it requires us to be our full selves in order for it to be its best self. In order for America to win, Black folk got to show up authentically as our full selves, which means community, the love you're talking about, seeing one another as brothers and sisters, understanding how power works for the good of the collective, not for me personally and my taxes, but all of us. And if everybody's not eating, I'm not happy. You know, like that has to be the edict. So I just wanted to reiterate. I'm sorry.
No, it's
Go ahead,
so
please
true
talk.
what you're saying. In some ways, I think that each generation and each people bring their own space. I am convinced that Black folks have been, if we ain't a demonstration of love, the fact that America ain't burned down right now, really speaks to literally we are a demonstration and an embodiment of love in the midst of pain, right? We are the embodiment of how there ain't nobody, and I'll put this up, check me if I'm wrong, there ain't nobody that really taps into understanding the power of democracy like Black folk. And it ain't about no system. It's literally about a sense of fairness and equity, that people have a sense of agency, and that when people are able to operate in their agency, it provides protection for them. We understand that. We understand that beyond, like, you know, there's some folks that see democracy as the only thing that they see, they don't even believe in the principle of democracy. You know, they see it as worshiping, standing up for a flag. That ain't patriotic. You standing up for a flag and you want us to stand up for a flag because what you want is you want to control us. If you really are honest about democracy, then you wouldn't be out in the street saying don't count the votes. Like, think about it. That's the most anti-democratic thing that you could actually say. Don't count the votes. I mean, like, really. So there are some in this country, we're gonna have to be honest, that have never wanted democracy, don't want democracy, have never done democracy, have gone out of their way. They created a war in this country, right? Where millions of folks have died because they did not want folks to have access to be in a space around democracy. And so I'm raising that because we got to know what time it is, but more than anything, Karen, we got to know who we are. Like, that love is not a weakness. Love is our superpower. I am clear love is my superpower, right? I am that sister that can both cuss you out and love you to death. I'm her, right? You know, and so I think I am she. My point is, there's a particular way that we've allowed even this concept, which is why with Black Voters Matter, we use these two anchors our work in. We anchor our work in love and power, because I think that if there was an understanding of the use of both and the context of both, that we could literally create the nation that we deserve. That at the end of the day, folks don't even know what love is. How you saying you love a country or you love people, human beings, and there are children in cages and that don't bother you? What's wrong with you? Like what is wrong with you that there are women that are coming here seeking refuge, right? that are seeking refuge and getting a hysterectomy without their permission because because they got a different path. How dare you call another human being on this earth that you ain't do nothing to create an alien? Who the hell are you? You ain't from this world. Something wrong with you if you see them as something other. My point is, with all of that, the absence of love rests in that person. When you are at the point that you're unable to see the humanity of another human being, there's some deficiency in you related to love. And so that's why I'm saying that on some level, I'm not talking about the love that we buy on Valentine's Day. I'm not talking about the love that we go to the movies. I'm talking about the very thing that allows you to tap into the human spirit, that recognizes that all of these constructs, from race to gender to sexuality, are all labels that we've assigned to have some value that really don't have any value. That fundamentally what makes us human is that spirit within us, that's within us, right? And so that love is an activator of that. And so I know that's not political, and folks are like, well, that's not political. That's part of the problem. Part of the problem is if we shaped our politics, and I've been saying this, in the context of for the love of humanity, just think about it. There were policies before any policy discussion, folks sat back in that, regardless of where they were on the spectrum, and said, the policy we're gonna create for the love of humanity, blank. Like what would that policy look like? If we made decisions around who to elect in the office and it was driven by, for the love of humanity, I'm gonna vote this, what would that look like? What would the healthcare system look like if it was driven by that simple context of, for the love of humanity, I'm gonna create this? What would business look like? I'm raising this because we're making this be complicated about systems go to autocorrect, when the problem of what we are fundamentally dealing with is that we have also embodied some of the very values that have been used to oppress us. Like here we are, we can talk about greed, we can talk about who is valuable and who's not valuable. Like all of those things, if I go down the list, the very thing that, let me tell you who Trump was and who Trump is. Trump is a culmination of a particular kind of mindset in this country. And it ain't just held by white folks. At the end of the day, this whole notion of I will win by whatever means necessary, whatever I got to do, if I got to step over somebody, if I got to beat somebody down, whatever I got to do, if we are taking that value system, that's what you're seeing reflected in him. If we are literally in this value system that says, well, I mean, COVID, we need this money. So, okay, COVID gonna kill a couple of people, but it's gonna be the weakest of us so we can go forward. We do that every day. We make decisions every day about what's gonna get us money, right, at the expense of killing other people around us and thinking that is okay. Right? We are literally have allowed ourselves to have a particular space that we objectify women, that my value is how many holes I got on my arm. Right? That it becomes a defining mechanism, and what material possessions I own. That is out of the same exact mindset that is creating the oppression that we're fighting. So I just say we have to step back and radically reimagine this country, and we start with us. How are we showing up in this moment? How are we showing up in this space when we're talking about love and power? To me, Karen, that's the real work. Like when we show up, we have shown, whenever we show up, things got to change. When I walk in the room, things gonna change. I expect that. And if not, I'm going back thinking like, why it didn't. Some got to move. Even if I don't get what I want, a little more love got to be deposited in that room when I leave. You're going to think, if nothing else, you're going to think about changing, if nothing else. And so I'm just saying that at some point, if we took that on as a responsibility, instead of being so infatuated on how I'm going to do better than the other person, but literally, how am I going to create a world that is going to benefit beyond me, that is going to benefit all of us? Why would we not want that world?
We do want that world. We do here. You're speaking to the converted. We are the choir. We are singing along in the background, humming. Latosha Brown is her name. How do we hold the Biden-Harris administration accountable?
I think we have, it's the same way. I've said this from day one. We talk about our work from 365 days out of year, that's when our work can't stop, won't stop. That what will be a grave mistake. And I'll go back and say what happened in the Obama administration. I'm somebody that worked on the Obama campaign as part of a PAC for several states. And at the end of the day, you know, I think this whole notion of proxy democracy don't work. That we're just gonna elect somebody and let them go about their devices. One, we have to have an analysis is that the system ain't broken. The system is doing exactly what the system was designed to do, right? And so if we really want fundamental change, then we're going to have to push leaders to they themselves push for that change and to create that change. And the bottom line is they will not do that. What would be the incentive? What would be the incentive to
well, some said, let's hold the vote. So we are not voting unless you do these things.
Absolutely. So I you know, this is my problem with, I do have a criticism around we'll hold the vote. And I would love to share that with you. You know, my criticism around it is, I just take a basketball game, if I can, right? That, now I understand the spirit of it. I actually do. But I'm in a basketball game, and somebody's going, and I'm at another team I'm playing who has a home advantage, and they've got referees that cheat. Y'all have played a game before that you know the referee's gonna cheat, and you have the home advantage, and you're down a couple of seconds, right? What you gonna do? I'm like, they cheating, I'm just gonna sit on the side, and I'm just gonna let them win this game. Some people will do that. Some people will give up and just decide, I'm gonna show them a lesson. Let me tell you what Latosha Brown gonna do. I'm going hard in the paint. I'm going to try to make sure that I put this whooping on you, that you're going to realize the next time you try to cheat, the next time that there are consequences for messing with me and my people. And so part of my critique of, not critique of the, you know, the criticism that the criticism that is the engine around the will hold the vote. I actually think that there's valid criticism around it, right? Around the political parties, right? But it as a strategy, I'm not sure what the strategy is, because like right now, who do withhold the vote people at, and what's the strategy? Where, like, what, I mean, you where you at in the game? I'm just saying, where you at?
I don't know.
Where you at, right?
Very, very quiet right now. Very, very quiet. Very quiet.
Part of it is we need to understand this ain't about proving no point. This is about power, damn it. You either get power or you don't. And so sometimes even in the getting the power, I am one of the first ones that I will tell you, as much as the work that I do, like you can find, I have sued the Democratic Party. For folks who all got all them theories, how many of them started third party? I have. How many of them have organized folks? I have. How many of them have sued the Democrats and Republicans? I have. So yes, I can talk. I am going to talk, because I'm not just coming up with a theory, absence of trying the different tools. And have I failed? Absolutely. I've failed miserably, but I've also won extraordinarily as well. And so for me, I'm raising that, because at the end of the day, you either in the game or you ain't. And that's fine. Everybody don't want to play the game, and that's fine. But the bottom line is, for me, that my people are vulnerable. And when my folks are at war, I don't have the luxury. I don't care about my opinion of being right. What I care about is if there's anything that I can do within my power to relieve some of the pain of my people, I'm going to do that. And you are foolish if you think that all folks are created equal, because I have been in a courtroom where there's one DA and another DA, and having just a change in a DA make a difference between whether our folks get 6 months in prison to life. I have seen the difference when it's a judge. So to pretend and act like it doesn't matter is not being authentic. It is not having an analysis about power. And so I agree that we can't just focus on doing this now. We have to do a short-term and a long-term strategy. For me, doing the voting work now is part of the harm reduction, while I'm also building and pushing around changing systems and creating alternatives. If you ain't doing that work, I'm sorry, sit down somewhere, right? You got to do that work. You got to do that work. And I'm not saying you got to do my work, but it is irresponsible to tell people to not fight for them, to protect themselves, to see voting as a, so, I mean, let me just say this, and this is gonna probably be a little controversial, but it's the truth. More Black folks in Georgia voted for Biden than voted for Obama. So let me ask you this, Karen. You think we were voting for Biden?
No.
Like, I
we
mean,
would
that's what
not.
I'm saying. People have simplified this as if Black folks are some of the most sophisticated tactical voters in this country. We have always used the power of vote to protect our community. So they marginalize that when you make this all be about one issue. We ain't never had the luxury or the privilege. You don't understand white power, the analysis of how white power works in this country, right? If you reduce everything down to one issue, that fundamentally our voting and engagement has always been a tactical strategy around providing some relief and protection to our folks. None of us are romanticizing that I know that we about to have kumbaya on next week and all is going to be well. No, but what we did understand is that someone that aligns themselves with a white supremacist, those of us from the deep South know that ain't nothing to play with. Right? We did understand that there is a difference, right, between someone who literally has appointed all judges and not a single Black one, not a single Black person, not one in 4 years. We know what that means. So writing is on the wall, right? With someone who has a long history, right, of lying, of using whoever, he don't even care about white folks, right? But using whatever tactic he needs to use to gain power. I'm raising this because we got to get beyond this, what I feel, opinion analysis. We talk about power. And so at the end of the day, if you break in my house and all I got is a bottle of vitamins, I'm trying to beat the hell out of you with these vitamins. This is all I got, but I'm going to use these vitamins to back you up off me. And so we got to see voting as, no, it is not. I'm the first one to say, it is not the panacea. It is not going to be the Black liberation strategy. It is going to be one tool that can provide some relief for many in our community are hurting. If folks were figured out, folks to tell people not to vote, how are you going to take care of those folks that lose their benefits and can make the difference between whether they live or die? Are you going to take care of folks who literally are dependent on their health care right now, right? So at the end of the day, it is irresponsible when we're literally not having a conversation about what this is really about. And this is really a harm reduction strategy for our community, as I'm hoping, as we seek to build and to push other alternatives so that we can replace these systems that we know are inherently racist.